Thank you so much. I will really try to address as many as possible of the issues you have raised, but there are so many precise and concrete answers that questions that I'm not able to go into all of them, but we'll try to group them. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the questions, for the interest, and also I think that this session and all the questions you have asked demonstrates the value of NATO-EU cooperation, because most of the issues you have raised are issues related to how NATO and the EU has to work together to address common challenges. And many of you ask questions about Ukraine and how we can support Ukraine and what we can do more for Ukraine. And first of all, there is coordination going on at the political level, but also in the very practical level. We have a coordination cell in Wiesbaden where NATO allies, EU members are together and very practically coordinating the aid and the support. Both identifying the needs from Ukraine and then approaching different countries, ensuring that we build packages of support, because you need to understand that when you deliver military support, it's not only about delivering a cannon, it's about delivering that artillery piece, but also the ammunition, the spare parts, the training, and maintenance facilities, so we can ensure that the whole system can work. And some of you asked me what is the top priority, and I think that in one way the top priority now is to ensure that all the systems which are already in Ukraine actually works. Because there is an enormous need to provide ammunition, maintenance, spare parts, to ensure that the systems which are already delivered actually function. I'm not saying that we should not consider to deliver new systems, and we are now in the process of delivering F-16s, but in the public debate, it's perhaps a bit too much focus on new systems instead of ensuring that all the existing systems have all the maintenance they need to actually function. There is coordination. I've been there myself. It's very impressive how NATO-EU allies, the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, but also, of course, a lot of EU members are together and in a very practical way coordinate, and I ensure we will continue to do so. Second, on standardization and procurement. Again, I welcome the things that the EU does. NATO has also different programs. We realized last fall or last summer that this was going to be a war of attrition. So then production becomes extremely important. In the beginning, we depleted our stocks to provide support to Ukraine, but our stocks are not big enough, so we need to ramp up production. The reality is that our production capacity is not as big as it should be. That's the reason why we now actually see some good progress in new investments and more production throughout the alliance in EU and non-EU NATO allied countries. I welcome the efforts of the European Union. NATO, as I mentioned, had this. We have done joint procurement for many years through the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, and also groups of allies, EU, non-EU allies, are going together and doing joint procurement, and some are just doing it individually as allies. To be honest, the most important thing is not the framework where we decide to ramp up production and procure ammunition. The most important thing is that we actually do it. Be it in the EU framework or a NATO framework or a group of countries or individual allies. And the thing that really matters is to sign contracts. We need nations to sign contracts because that enables the industry to invest and to ramp up production. And standardization is, of course, key. That has been an issue for NATO for decades. We have now stepped up our efforts to ensure standardization because we have also seen some gaps there. And of course, this has to be a NATO effort because, as you know, 80% of NATO's defense spending comes from non-EU allies. So we need standardization across the alliance, and therefore we welcome the increased efforts by NATO to do more on standardization. Then on the offensive and whether the Ukrainians are gaining ground or not. Well, I think we have to remember that no one ever said that this was going to be easy, the offensive. It was clearly stated this was going to be a bloody, difficult and hard offensive. Because what we have seen is, of course, that the Russians have prepared defensive lines, layers of defensive lines, with trenches, with obstacles to battle tanks, dragon teeth, and mines, enormous amounts of mines. Hardly any time in history we have seen more mines on the battlefield than we see in Ukraine today. So it was obvious that this was going to be extremely difficult. But the Ukrainians decided to launch the offensive because they are going to liberate their land. And they are making progress. Not perhaps as much as we hoped for, but they are gaining ground gradually. Some 100 meters per day. Meaning that when the Ukrainians are gaining ground, the Russians are losing ground. And we have to remember the starting point. The starting point is that the Russian army used to be the second strongest in the world. And now the Russian army is the second strongest in Ukraine. And that's quite impressive by the Ukrainians. And that's the courage, the will, the commitment, the determination of the Ukrainian soldiers that are making this possible. And we also need to remember the starting point. And the starting point was that when the invasion happened, the full-scale invasion happened in February, we were told by most experts that Kiev would fall within days and Ukraine would fall within weeks. The Ukrainians proved them wrong by pushing back the Russian invaders, liberating the north around Kiev, the east around Kharkiv, and then bigger territories in the south and around Kherson. And now they are gaining more ground, liberating more Ukrainian territory. And then the same experts that told us that Ukraine will fall within weeks are complaining about the speed of the offensive. The reality is that the Ukrainians are actually exceeding expectation again and again. And we need to remember what's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to support them. We can advise them, but it has to be the Ukrainian commanders, the soldiers on the ground, that make the difficult decisions. We cannot sit here in Brussels, in the NATO headquarters, on the EU headquarters, and tell them exactly how to fight. That's their task, they're risking their lives, and we just support them. And we praise them for the courage. And then I say this also because wars are by nature unpredictable. No one knows exactly where we are in a week or two or a month or a year from now. And hardly any war we will see only, once I say, victories for the side we support. There will be bad days and good days. We need to be with Ukraine, not only good times, but also bad times. So those who are conveying kind of message that, well, only if they win, we will continue to support them. No, we support them when they win and if they lose. We are there with Ukraine. Because to support Ukraine is not an option. It's a necessity to ensure that we preserve peace for our members, for our countries, and to ensure that authoritarian regimes doesn't achieve what they want by violating international law and using military force. So I just tell you that, of course, sometimes it's hard to imagine how brutal this war is. But we need to never forget our responsibility to provide support to Ukraine. Then I had a concrete question about the drone, the possible drone. The Romanian authorities have confirmed and informed NATO about that debris from a potential possible drone have been found near the border with Ukraine. They informed NATO allies in a regular meeting yesterday about all their findings, and the investigation is going on, and it demonstrates the risk of incidents and accidents. We don't have any information indicating any intentional attack by Russia, and we are awaiting the outcome of the ongoing investigation. Regardless of that outcome, what we have seen, of course, is a lot of fighting and also air attacks close to NATO borders. And we also had other incidents in Poland and elsewhere. And therefore, we have increased our vigilance. We are closely monitoring what's going on close to our borders. And we have also increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. There were questions about the Black Sea. The Black Sea is of great importance for NATO. We condemn that Russia has withdrawn from the Black Sea grain deal. We welcome the efforts by Turkey to try to re-establish the grain deal. Of course, the best way to ensure safe and secure shipment of grain from Ukraine is to end the war. The reason why we have these problems is because of the war. And then the grain deal is a way to try to mitigate some of the consequences of the war. Let me also say that we have increased our presence in the region. We have done that over a long period of time, but especially since the war, with more maritime patrol aircraft, with battle groups in Bulgaria, in Romania, and we are closely monitoring the whole situation in the Black Sea region, including the littoral states. There were a question about the difference between the Vilnius and the Warsaw Summit, and we told, yes, also I will not compare two very successful summits, but there is a difference, is that you're right, that in Warsaw we decided to deploy new battle groups. What we did actually before Vilnius was that we, when the morning of the invasion, we activated NATO defense plans. And by activating NATO defense plans, we give Sarkar the authority to deploy more forces where and when he deems that necessary. So he has increased the presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We have doubled the number of battle groups from 4 to 8, and we have more air and naval forces available. So we will do what is needed to defend every inch of Allied territory. This is part about forward presence, but it's also very much about our ability to reinforce, and that's the reason why a more high readiness forces is the key to address any potential threat caused by the war in Ukraine and Russia's aggressive actions. Then I need to move on. South, many questions about that. The South is, of course, of great importance for NATO. The instability in North Africa, Middle East creates threats and challenges for the whole alliance, not only for the southern allies. We have our presence in Iraq to help them train and equip their forces to fight terrorism, ISIS. We work with countries like Mauritania, Tunisia, to help them fight terrorism. Jordan, another close partner of NATO. But I think we need to realize that this is also very much about economic and diplomatic efforts, where also other institutions than NATO has to play a key role. So again, an area where we work together, NATO and the European Union. Then China. China, we don't regard China as an adversary, but we are concerned about the challenges that China poses to our values, to our interests, and to our security. China doesn't share our values. They don't believe in freedom of speech, democratic values, and they have expressed that quite clearly. They crack down on journalists, on opposition, on dissidents across the country. We have seen how they have cracked down on democratic rights in Hong Kong. We see how they are threatening Taiwan, and we see how China is investing heavily in modern nuclear weapons, more military capabilities, and also long-range missiles, and how they also work more and more closer together with Russia. Just before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia and China signed an agreement where they promised each other partnership without any limits, and China has not condemned the invasion of Ukraine. So I think what we need to realize is that security is not regional, security is global. What happens in Ukraine matters for Asia, and what happens in Asia matters for us. And therefore we welcome the stronger partnership we have with the Asia-Pacific countries. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea participated in the NATO summit, and we are ready to do even more, to do as much as possible to work together with these countries. Then I had several questions about defense spending. Well, of course, I would have liked to see all allies meet the 2% guideline. That is not the case. But I'm encouraged by what allies are doing. They are ramping up spending, and since 2014, all allies have increased defense spending. Back in 2014, when we made the agreement, we had only 3 allies meeting the 2% guideline. Now 11 allies meet the 2% guideline, and almost all allies have plans in place to be there within a few years. And even those allies who are not at 2% have significantly increased. Germany is one example where actually spending is going significantly up. So yes, I see progress, and I welcome that progress. Then I think, since my time is really running out, a few more minutes. Okay, then I can say one thing about this paradox about weapons, because you said, the representative from Greece said that in a way he never believed that he would support the delivery of weapons to Ukraine, and I think for many people that's a paradox. It is a paradox. Because we all want peace, we all want to invest in something else than weapons. But the problem is that sometimes you need to invest in weapons to ensure peace. That's a basic thing. And that's a lesson we have learned again and again. And I remember very well the end of the Cold War, where we all were able to reduce defense spending. I don't know exactly the defense spending in Greece, but I know that the defense spending in my country was 3% of GDP at the end of the Cold War. Yeah. And then we reduced it to just above 1%. And I was responsible for that. I did not all of that, but part of it. Because I was a Norwegian politician. And across the lines, government, parliaments reduced defense spending. Because tensions went down. We saw less threats. We believed in a new partnership, and we believed in the possibility of working with Russia. And I was a strong believer in that. Because we have seen again and again in history that old enemies can become friends. You see that in Europe. France, United Kingdom, Germany and France fought each other for centuries. Now they are closest friends and allies in the European Union. And if you go to the Nordic countries, we have been fighting each other since the Viking Age for hundreds of years. And now Swedes and Danes and Finns and Norwegians are, the best friends. So it's possible. So I believe it was possible also to overcome, as we have done in Europe for most European countries, within the framework of the European Union and NATO, to also overcome that relationship with Russia. Russia didn't choose that path. Russia decided to control neighbors, to try to re-establish sphere of influence, and saying that there was a provocation if a country decided to join NATO. It is not a provocation, it is a democratic sovereign right of every nation to choose its own path. And therefore we had Georgia in 2008, we had Crimea in 2014, and then the full-fledged invasion in 2014. Russia's walked away, and I regret that, but then there is no other option for us than to ensure peace for NATO allies, for EU members, by investing in defense, supporting Ukraine, because if President Putin wins in Ukraine, it's a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but it's also dangerous for us. It sends a message that when they use military force, they get what they want, authoritarian leaders. So it's in our security interest to support Ukraine, and therefore I'm extremely grateful for all the support that EU members, the European Union and NATO allies are providing to Ukraine. Thank you so much.